Today on the SKID factory, we're doing some wiring. Today on the SKID factory, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to show you how to do a wiring loom splice. A wiring loom splice, or merge as some people call it, is when you integrate two different wiring harnesses together to create a single harness that will allow you to use a different engine in a car that didn't normally come with it. So this is pretty common in the Subaru world, where there's a lot of good cars that don't have good turbo engines in them. So a lot of this work is to either change to a newer turbo engine or fit a turbo engine into a non-turbo car. So the most common use for this is putting an OBD2 type ECU out of a later model WRX into either earlier model cars or into an NA vehicle. This allows you to have an ECU that's fully tunable. It's also a lot more powerful than the earlier ECUs, and also allows you to have obviously a newer engine that's got better features, is stronger and more tunable. You don't need a lot of tools to do this job. The main ones are just basic wiring equipment, so side cutters, a blade or a Stanley knife. This is probably a bit safer, but I prefer these. Tape, crimpers, wire strippers, and the most important thing is information. So you need workshop manuals with wiring diagrams in it, and ECU pinout charts as well is also a good idea, and of course you can get it off the internet as well. Do not ever attempt to do this without those things. You will not get it right if you don't have information, and it's got to be accurate. So you need to, if you're getting them off the internet, you need to sort of run through it and make sure that it is applicable to the wiring looms that you've got, because there's a lot of variations in ECUs around the world. So they might have the same ECU in it, but it might be pinned differently because different countries have different requirements for emission control. And also Japanese manufacturers will use the same connector in 10 different computers and have completely different pinouts. So don't rely on it just because it looks exactly the same. It doesn't matter. They use the same manufacturers for connectors and stuff like that. And just because it's got the same plugs doesn't mean it's the same pinout at all. So make sure you confirm that what you're looking at is what you're working with, and then you'll be fine. To do this job, it requires two wiring looms to complete. So one is from the donor car where the engine is coming from, and the other wiring loom is for the vehicle that the engine's going into. So one of them will have its engine management system wiring removed from it and the rest trashed. The other one will have the engine management wiring removed from it as well, but we'll trash the engine management wiring instead of the rest of the loom. So basically you're going to have a body loom, an engine management loom, and then we're going to lay them over the top of each other and reintegrate them. So what you end up at the end is basically what a wiring loom that Subaru would have made if they put that engine in that car. So if you do it that way, everything works the same as factory. All the equipment works. If you try and stuff one wiring loom into a car that's not meant to be in there, you're doing 10 times the work, because nothing in the car will work properly. So the easiest way to do it is this, even though it obviously looks very complicated. It's the most practical way of achieving it. So we start by stripping the tape and the conduit and any covering off the wiring loom. On the way through, we strip and we retape. So you can't just strip all the wiring covering off and allow the loom to spring open into a big ball, because you'll never get it back into place again. This is the wiring loom that contains the engine management wiring we want. It's out of around about 2002 WRX. So we're going to cut out the engine management wiring. That's your ECU connectors. And discard the rest of the wiring loom. It's not required. So that's your body wiring that's going to go in the bin. So what I do here is I try and lay out the wiring loom the way it is in the car. So if you're from the perspective of the driver's seat, you're going to have this loom sort of So your steering wheel would be around about here. That's the middle of the car. This is all in behind the heater boxes in the car as well, so you have to remove the entire dash and everything to get these out, which is not that big a deal, but can be a bit daunting to some people. So that's a firewall entry plug. So this is out in the engine bay. This is inside the car. That's your second firewall entry plug. So sort of pull these through and have them over there. ECU is down here on the floor. This goes out and exits into the inner guard on the passenger side, right-hand drive passenger side. And then this re-enters, that's your connectors for the sort of your main, some of your main engine connectors that are in the engine bay near the battery. So get it laid out like that, then you've got a good bearing of where everything sits. And now we start pulling all the covering off. So as I said, as you're pulling the covering off, you need to keep sort of tape points like this. So that's actually factory. There's usually a big white plate over here that protects the wiring from the heater box. But this is basically what we're going to do all the way along the wiring loom, is just tape it up so it doesn't open up and get tangled. So I've done this job like, I don't know, 500 times. So I know what everything is. It's kind of easy for me. But so the first thing you need to know is which of these connectors actually go to the engine. So the best way to do that is to mark them, like tag them with a bit of tape or whatever when you pull the thing apart in the first place. So they're engine connectors, all this stuff isn't. So this stuff all goes. The one thing I do here is that's your washer bottle connectors. What I'll do with these is actually tape them on to the engine connectors there and then just chop them off, because that washer bottle is in the same place in the new car. So that gives me a reference point for how far into the engine bay these need to be to actually reach the connectors for the engine. So I just tape them on there, just chop it off, and then there's my reference mark for when I overlay the loom. Those will still be there on the other loom, and we can just sort of line them up within reason to the other, and then we'll know that these plugs are going to reach where they have to reach. You can do the same on the other part of the loom here. Another piece that's always going to be in the same place between the two is this little connector here, which is for the brake master cylinder low fluid level warning. So same thing there. I'd tape that on there, then chop it off. Other stuff doesn't need to be there. I just chop it off straight up. So that's wiper motor. So we start opening it up then, tape all the way along. So from here on down, it's engine management only. So I'm just going to leave that tape for the moment and then start stripping away. You do have to be careful that you don't get too violent with these razor blades or Stanley knife, whatever you're using, because you will cut into the wire, which is not cool, especially if it's a shielded wire like that one. You don't want to be cutting into that. You'll damage the shield. So as we pull these off, bits of conduit, that's 100% reusable. Don't chuck it in the bin. We don't need any more waste in the world. So I put them to the side. And at the end, when I'm retaping, we'll show you, I reuse whatever is applicable. You're obviously going to have nearly double the amount that you need because there's 2 wiring looms getting pulled apart. But it's best to keep them and reuse them. So you're probably thinking at the moment, wow, this is a bloody tedious job, stripping all this off and separating it. And you'll be right. And that's why wiring costs a lot of money, because it's very labour intensive and also requires someone with quite a bit of knowledge to get right. So you can save a lot of money by learning how to do it yourself, or just pay the money to someone who's a pro and appreciate the fact that they've spent a lot of time learning how to do it.
It's like watching grass grow.
Wires are exciting, Woody. So I asked Rodriguez to put the camera down and give me a bit of a hand to strip everything off so we can speed this process up. And here's a bit of an example about why you need to tape shit up.
I'm not finished, bro. Come on, give me a break.
Thank you, Helpy Helperton.
So, while you're there, and before I keep stripping wires off that you're just going to snip off, because I started stripping all this off, but
That's nothing.
that's just going to get chopped. So, out of all of the wires here, what are you actually keeping?
So the engine management side of things is pretty much all over here, plus that. But the only thing that's around here, so this is sort of underneath your steering column. That's the OBD2 plug. So the other wiring loom has got an OBD2 plug already, but what I do is to save me from trying to go through the wiring diagram is I cut all this out and keep it all together. It's related to these connectors up here. So this is like flash memory connectors. So when you reprogram the ECU, you got to put bridge wires on here and join these together and do special magic stuff and to reprogram the ECU. So all that stuff's got to go into the other wiring loom. Although it has an OBD2 plug, it isn't OBD2 compliant. So it's still just Subaru Select Monitor, which is a different protocol. So what I do with this is just cut it all out and keep it together so I can see where one of those wires goes down to the plug, a couple more go over to the ECU. So I just cut it out and put it to the side so I can refer back to it and then just modify the other loom to suit. So that's pretty much all that's needed around here.
So pretty much this stuff here,
All of this is just a bin job, yeah.
ends up in the bin.
Yep.
Wow.
So this stuff here is kind of what has replaced conduit in a lot of Japanese cars. So it's kind of like a plastic sheath with adhesive on it. So I always reuse this stuff. It's really good. It's a really good protector, and it's not abrasive like conduit. If you're putting it next to other things, like conduit will rub a hole in aluminium. It's that bad. And it also allows the loom to move. So that's a big thing when you're doing wiring looms. You don't want to trap the wires so hard that there's no movement in them, because it'll pull whichever wires are shortest. It'll start pulling on that, and that can cause a problem. So you can see underneath that's completely open. So it's a good thing. So that goes to the side, and that'll get reused. So I'm about to start cutting away this unnecessary bits. That's engine, that's junk. So you're probably thinking to yourself right now, why would anyone go to this much trouble to do this sort of work to put into an old Subaru Legacy Liberty sort of thing? We actually, Dose Vader and I used to do this work all day, every day, years ago. Just doing engine swaps on Liberties, Legacies that didn't come out with turbo engines. And at the time it was just people wanted to have this car that Subaru should have built but they never did. So it was all WRX engines into earlier Subarus, mid-90s ones. So I guess it kind of doesn't make sense on some scale, but it's just a sort of people wanting to be a bit unique with their vehicles, I suppose. And also, there's also an element of legality to it as well. You could put an aftermarket ECU in this to run the engine that's in this vehicle, but in many states you can't get the car registered if it's got an aftermarket ECU, or you have to put it through like a very stringent emissions test, which is virtually impossible to pass without a factory ECU. So the easiest way to do it is to do this. It's got a factory ECU. Basically, the engineer doesn't look any further than that. Doesn't matter if you've retuned it so it's completely not emissions friendly anymore. That doesn't matter as long as it's there. So it's that's kind of one of the reasons why it's done. Despite the cost and complexity, it's got its place.
You forgot the tape, Alan.
It's because this is going in the bin, so we're going to get choppy now.
So that's the start of your pile.
It'll get bigger, don't worry. So this is all OBD2 connector and flash memory stuff. So I'm just going to pull it all back and then tape it into a group. I've already cut out the flash, the OBD2 connector, and some of the flash memory stuff. So I've got to just pull these couple through.
Pretty messy.
So
there,
yeah, I was about to say, as you can see, it's starting to get
don't forget that tape, man.
pretty nasty. Well, at this point, I have to untape it so I can do stuff like this. We're getting close to where I'll be actually cutting away the engine from the rest of the loom. So there's a few little branches you can see. All this goes to the ECU, except these two. That's your oil pressure and temperature gauge wires. So we just give them a snip. I normally just tie a little loose knot like that in, hold them together. On this connector here, there's a couple more. And these ones here are your reverse lights. So we do the same thing with that, just tie a little knot in it. And when I cut off the other one, I will do the same with that. And I know what the wire colours are, so I know what it is, but you've got to keep in mind that there's other things in this connector. It's not really engine management, but this is best to stay as it is because you're putting the different gearbox and everything in, all this stuff's going to be different and it suits the gearbox, and if you're changing the gearbox, you want to keep the plugs that suit it, otherwise you're just going to cause yourself more work. So,
luckily you're not colourblind, Alan.
well, you say that, but one of the things you should never do when you're doing wiring is go by colours, because you will just get yourself into trouble. People assume that red's power and black's ground and it's that simple. It's nothing like that, especially not in Japanese car world. That you can have an Impreza with an EJ25 engine in it with exact same computer wiring everything as the Liberty that's got the same engine, and all the wires will be a different colour because it's an Impreza. So you just can't go off colours. It's not the way to do it. It might be a visual guide if you like, oh, here's the wire and I want to find it over there. Sure, use that as a visual guide, but never use it as gospel, because it doesn't work that way. I'm going to cut most of the ECU, the remaining ECU to body loom wires off here. But first I've just got to track a few wires right over to the other side because I need a bit more length out of them. These wires are for the fuel pump control module. So the ECU controls it's like a solid state relay sort of thing, a voltage control module for the fuel pump. And you have to use it because otherwise it's like part of the control circuit. It'll set codes and things won't work properly. You can turn the codes off, but I just wire the unit in because it's supposed to be there. It's normally in the rear of the car, but when we do these looms, that's not really practical because I'm doing this remotely. The car is, God knows where, it's probably in Sydney or something. So I put it in the front of the car and then we just run 2 new wires to the rear for the pump. So these are the control wires here. So I'm just going to sort of give them a bit of a tug and try and ID them here. So there's one. Pull it through. There's the other. Snip. So I pull these right through to here-ish. And again, just give them a little tie together so you know they're a pair. there's one more wire, which is actually the power from the front of the car to the rear for the fuel pump. And surprise, surprise, guess which one it is? So it's probably had like an immobiliser alarm system or something in it. Most of these Australian ones do have one that's called a Brant, which is an awful keypad system that's really difficult to use and very problematic. I don't know why, but this one doesn't seem to have it, because every single one ever sold had them as an anti-theft device. But that's good, because it makes an absolute mess of the wiring loom. It's like fitted by a bunch of monkeys somewhere, just like the worst wiring job you've ever seen. Maybe one of the reasons why they were so problematic at the time. Anyone that's ever owned a WRX in Australia will understand what I'm talking about and how frustrating and useless the system is. But anyway, this is being chopped and then reconnected, and you can see what a brilliant job that is.
Does that make your blood boil?
Oh, no, it just makes me weep for humanity. So I'll pull that one through as well. It's a bit more beefy. So that goes to that relay, which is here. So that powers up the unit. This is the unit in question. It's a fuel pump control module. So it uses a frequency input to output a voltage from the ECU. So we'll just wire that up in the car at the front and then run 2 new wires to the rear of the car. It has to have both wires, negative and positive, from the fuel pump have to go through this. Otherwise it won't work. So basically we just run a pair of new wires along the sill, and the end user who owns the car, whoever that is, they just have to hook it up to the pump. So that'll all go in at the same time. So we're pretty much ready to just chop all this off and bin it now. Sort of run along here a bit and find a spot, start chopping. Done deal. So this is like part of the bunch of wires we have to connect. I've just pulled it right through up towards the ECU connectors, just keep things tidy. Otherwise you can lose track of them once you've got a big open wiring loom. So they're there, we've got a few there. A few more here. They're sort of the ones that got to go to that side of the car.
Just a few, you say?
Yeah. So I'm just going to lay this on the floor, sort of stop it getting tangled up. And then we got the box full of other loom here. Same thing, we'll lay it out the way it sits in the car.
Now that's that big firewall connector you were talking about, Al.
Yeah, so someone's ripped it off the other loom. It's that one's small compared to what the other one would have had. So with this little firewall shield, the first thing I do with that is just put an arrow upwards. Obviously the arrow side's the side that comes towards me, because once you pull that off, spend half a day joining things together, you don't want to forget which way it goes on. So it's obviously got mounting bolt holes here for bolting it onto the firewall. So this loom is the one that we're going to have to do some like marking and checking length measurements for, because this is what's going to go back in the car once that engine management is built into it. So it has to be the same as where it came out, otherwise they're going to try and fit it back into the car and things are going to be in the wrong place. Like little things like the length between there and there to the grommet. If you put the grommet right back here, it won't reach. So that does vary between vehicles and models. So that's one of the things we've got to take note of. The length between here, that length there's got to be noted, and it's got to go back in the same place. So little things like that, we just either write it down or put a tag on it so we know where the grommet's at, that sort of thing. So we'll do that. As we pull it apart, we'll do that as well. So starts with the same thing, strip off the conduit. So see you in an hour or so.
Why do you use mil, bro, not centimeters? I always speak in...
There's no such thing as centimeters.
No such thing as centimeters? Probably a lot of American viewers going, what's a millimeter?
40 thousandths of an inch.
40 thousandths of an inch.
That makes heaps more sense, doesn't it?
You're like once a carpenter or something.
No. It's just how it works. So this loom is heaps less full on than the other one. It's a very simple engine management and pretty simple engine because it was just an EJ25 single overhead cam. So this is the ECU connectors for it. What we've done is all this stuff that's hanging down, that used to go to the engine. So that no longer required. So they'll all get cut off. And these that are left, we leave them connected to the engine connector, so you never just cut it off, because those engine connectors are your point of reference. So to identify what that wire is, you go to the ECU plug, ID it, find the pin number, look in your documentation that you've got, and then you can go, okay, that wire turns the fuel pump on or whatever. So if you just chop this off, you've got nothing. You've got to trace that through. It's just that this is the easiest place to get the information that you need. So you always just leave them there, cut them off one by one, and then at the end of it, plug will just fall on the floor because you've used up all the wires that you need. So that's how it's done. So after I trim all this extra crap off just to get it out of the way, keep things tidy, we'll then bring the other loom back in and overlay it and start adjusting the lengths of it to try and get it in an optimum position, because the wiring path that this loom takes isn't the same as that one because the cars are different. So you do sometimes have to compromise a little bit to get the lengths correct. Quite often I have to snip off some parts and separate them and then reconnect them because the distance from here to here is different or something like that. So we'll find out. Each loom is a little bit different depending on what sort of car it is and how old it is. So we'll get these chopped off and we'll get into it. Getting the ECU connectors in pretty much the same place is important. The ECU sits underneath a false floor on the passenger side, and the loom sort of wraps right around it and then comes back in from the other side. So you can imagine that's the old one. So if we get the bottom plug and the bottom plug relatively lined up, that's going to work. So once we've done that, I'll find my tape that Rodrigo stole and a little...
At least I was using it, bro.
Yeah. So you can see here things start to go bad. That's the different lengths that we're dealing with. So I have to start trying to adjust things around a bit to get everything to line up. As you can see, it gets to be a bit of a pain with the loose wires that are hanging out. So this one here is normally what I have to snip off, because I need it to branch from about here. So you can see the branching is happening a lot higher. So to allow me to go like that, I need to get rid of that. So I might be able to do it just by doubling it back over on this one and moving this down a small amount.
You make it look so easy, bro.
It is easy when you've done it 500 times. This is your outside the firewall part. So that's come through in a reasonable spot. From memory, I think this new wiring loom is going to be too long, but that doesn't matter. Too short is a problem. Too long's just loop it around a bit. So you can see I've left the starter motor wire on. It's not actually connected to anything, it's just another reference marker. So they are relatively matched up. As we move along, we'll get to the next marker. So that is the car's wiring loom. This is the new wiring, so that plugs that plug. So you can see there's a bit of a deficit there. But this section of the wiring loom here is way longer than it needs to be for what we're using it for. So that little bit of a difference there is not going to matter because this is normally wrapped all over the place anyway, so that's fine. So we can just pull out the marker now.
You don't go to the effort of sorting those wires?
No, completely impractical.
Probably making more problems for yourself doing that, would you not?
Oh, you'd have to source pins and there's absolutely no need for that. As I said, it's already really long in the WRX. This often gets burnt when people take the heat shields off, so it's better to reroute it anyway. And having a bit of extra length allows you to do that. So it's all good. One of the things I like to do when I'm doing this overlay is don't put the two looms together and keep them separately taped. It's kind of bad practice. You want the loom to be one, not two separate ones. Again, it causes the wires to pull. So as you're putting those bits of tape on to join the two sections of loom, you pull off the old separators and replace them with a single. Sort of work it around with your hands and make it sort of join together properly. So it's sort of the harness is moving in as one unit rather than two separate harnesses. Might appear to be pointless and more tedious than it already is, but once it's all taped up at the end, you will feel the difference if you make it two separate units. It won't move like that freely, and if you leave it like that, you always will end with one wire that's tighter than the rest. And that wire is the one that will break eventually if there's any fatigue movement or anything like that. So it's just good practice to try and keep the harness as a single bundle. And also don't tape it too tight. It should still be able to move. So we've got the wiring loom overlaid now. It's basically been taped up, so it's one. So now we've got to go through and join all the wires. So we've got a group of them there. They'll basically match up to what's left of the ECU connections from the old wiring. Got another bunch here. That's basically OBD2 stuff and the fuel pump control. So that sort of goes over that side. Power wise, I've actually already connected those. Because that unit there, I left that on the loom, it was way over here. So I've just actually cut them, pulled the wires back and re-terminated them and pulled those pins out. So that's a better way of doing it, if possible. You know, a lot of the time, a lot of these wires are just going to have to be joined, crimp joined and then heat shrink. That's just the only way you can do it. But if it is possible to do it that way, then that's a good way of doing it as well, so you don't have the sort of joins everywhere. So with the joins, this is the temperature and oil pressure switch wires that I was talking about earlier. That's from the legacy car. This is from the SDI engine or whatever it is, WRX engine. So to join them, basically got some heat shrink. Got to go on first, obviously. One on each.
And you're pro crimping, Alan, no soldering.
Yeah, I just crimp everything. If you want to solder it, go nuts, just do it properly. It's not so bad using solder on these smaller wires inside the car, sort of in this area here, because it's not subject to vibrations and that sort of thing like in an engine bay. So if that's the way you want to do it, then go hard. I did used to use solder years ago. Like, I've been doing this for a long time, but I never had a problem with it. It's always inside the car, protected, so it was never really a problem. But I just prefer to use crimping these days. It's just also a bit cleaner for me, because you don't have to have a hot iron sort of baking away next year and solder and crap going everywhere. So I just prefer that. But if you want to solder it, go nuts.
What's this gibberish on the screen here too?
So my WRX wiring is online. Anything that's after sort of 2001 is usually available as in like PDF form, because that's the way Subaru started doing it. So that's just up here on the screen. I've loaded it twice, because on one I've got the actual wiring schematic, and the other is the ECU pinout diagram. So you use both. The pinout diagram is actually a little bit easier to go off. So that's the way I'm doing it. I'm just sort of jumping between them. Sometimes you do have to use the schematic. The Liberty is still in book form. It's exactly the same thing. It's just that it's a bit old to be in book form, to be in online form. So it's still on a book. So you have to have both, no question. Don't start it unless you've got them. Otherwise, you'll just end up calling me and asking me to fix your problems. And it costs more if you've already messed it up. So don't start unless you've got information. You have to have it. All right, so we'll just show you a crimp. I'm not going to show you bloody 50 wire crimps. That's not exactly interesting. So,
and different coloured wires too, bro.
Yep, of course. So I give them a mechanical twist to give it a bit of pre-strength. It helps hold it together as well. Got a crimp there. Give the crimp a little roll over so it doesn't fall off very easily. Get the crimping pliers out. Don't do it like that, because that's not right. So that's what you're left with. Very secure. So I've done all the joins. You can just see them, small crimp joins with heat shrink over the top of them. This is all that's left of the original ECU plugs. Basically, once you've depleted all them, you should be pretty right. There was one wire left over in the new ECU loom, which is a fuel level sensor, which is not really required. So I just depinned it and binned it. So the next thing we do before we rewrap this loom is we're going to do a like a continuity test. So we're going to go through everything that what we've done and test it with a multimeter on continuity. So make sure that any wires that should have continuity through them. So there's a lot of branching of wires going on with the power supply system and that sort of thing. So we just use this to check and make sure that nothing's been missed. So I usually start. This is your main power relay. So it's a dual relay. So this black red wire is actually the constant main power. It pretty much supplies power to everything in the ECU system. So it actually does connect directly to here somewhere, there. You do have to be careful when you're probing wires, because shoving this right up inside a connector terminal can open up the connector and damage it. So you should really go through the back and probe. Sometimes that isn't possible on certain connectors, but so you do have to be very careful. I've had to fix many a wiring loom because people have opened up the connector terminals by shoving one of these in there, and you get really bad gremlin problems with it because of that. So just if you can't back probe, get a very small pin and use a pin, push that in, and then connect with the pin so you don't damage the terminal. So we got constant power there. This power supply actually comes from the fuse box. It will be there. OBD2 connector also has it. So basically we run through all the parts of that circuit that we know are there, make sure we've got continuity through everything. Then move on to, once that relay is switched on by the ECU, then we've got the switched power. One of them supplies the O2 sensor heaters. The other one supplies the rest of the system. So it's like a relay with two sets of internals in it, triggered by the one trigger. So we got a pair of O2 sensors. They're all good. Move on to the next one, which is your main power. Which is here somewhere. That's it there.
So Al, you obviously know what you're looking at there with the ECU plugs. Can you just explain that really you should be using that wiring diagram?
Yeah, so I know where everything is because I've done this so many times, but what you would do is look through your wiring diagrams and chart out that wire goes to the ECU. It also goes to this one of the main looms, and just make sure that you have continuity there, so you haven't missed something along the way. It's a reasonably complex sort of job. So you can see it goes to a lot of main sensors and powers them. So that's what you're really doing.
And this is the main relay, was it?
Yeah. So it's actually it's like two relays built into the one unit.
Is that just a Subaru thing, or is that a common thing over many manufacturers?
No, Subaru and Nissan, do it. It's actually a really good quality relay. Although they used to play up back in the old days, but they've been using them for 25 years or something now. They're a pretty good unit.
When you say old days, is that when you were like my age?
No, when you were born, like in about 1991 or something, that's when they used to play up. We used to replace them in cars because one circuit would disappear.
How old were you then?
Oh, I don't know, 19 or something.
Oh, so before my age then. What was I doing when I was 19?
People were born before you existed, mate.
Actually, when I was 19, you know what I was doing? I was working on Subarus.
Buzzing around me,
I was working on
annoying me,
Subarus,
probably.
bro. And coming down to sweat you and Miles at AM Auto. Every afternoon, bro. Look at us now.
Yeah.
Best of pals.
Annoying the crap out of me still. Alright, so this one's the ignition. So the easiest place to find this is the ignition is used. That's the fuel pump relay, so the ignition is used there, so I just go straight to that and then probe in. I know that's where it is at the ECU. It also goes out to the engine bay because that powers the coils. So you can hear the buzzing every time I'm getting a continuity.
Speaking of fuel pump, what happened to that silver controller?
It's here.
Where have you wired that in? Oh yeah.
So I've actually wired it directly to, so this switches on with ignition and just powers that box, and then the ECU controls the voltage out of the box via a frequency control. So it's got a ground, which is here. That's got to be grounded to the body. Power in, that's your one control wire, and the other one's a feedback wire. So it actually sends a signal back to the ECU to confirm that what the ECU is commanding is happening, and this is what's got to go to the back of the car. So what I do is just give them a long length of dual core wire that they have to run themselves, because the car itself is not wired in the right arrangement for that to work. So that's pretty much the only modification you've got to do after it goes back in. So that can just get mounted sort of in the foot pillar area. So we just go through all that, and I'll just go through and do every connection that I've done and confirm the connection point all through the car. So that can be quite a tedious job if you've got to refer to your wiring diagrams constantly. But as I said, everything gets easier with experience, so it doesn't take me long to do it because I'm so familiar with the wiring looms. But it is definitely good practice to test afterwards.
And then what happens now after we've done that? We just get back to wrapping.
Yeah, just wrap it back up again. So reuse all that stuff and wrap it up so it looks like a...
That's from two looms though, isn't it? That
yeah,
stuff?
it is. So you have plenty of spares. So it's no need to buy or new stuff. It's perfectly fine to reuse. All you're going to use is tape, which I use this what's called Loom tape. It's a bit different from normal tape. It's just a bit of a different feel to it. And I also use 25mm wide instead of 19 because I just prefer the wider tape.
That's the same stuff Timmy used on the Fairlane, wasn't it? Tim from Crimp My Ride.
He probably stole it off me, so probably.
What was it, bro? 1260, wasn't it?
Yep.
So much plastic to choose from, Alan.
Yeah, good, isn't it? So I'm just going to I'm just rewrapping the loom now. So there's just using small bits of this plastic, which is where it came from in the first place. Good protector.
Is that Loom tape you use? Is that anything special? Is it different to, say, your normal electrical tape that you normally use?
It's called Loom tape, so it is a little bit different. I prefer this one in particular because it actually will stick to itself, whereas a lot of modern electrical tapes are devoid of adhesive.
You just like wrap that up like a kebab and it's done.
Yep. That's how it's done. So it normally has adhesive on it when it's new, which is obviously not much use now. But
I remember taking it apart. My hands were covered in like sticky old glue. How old is this loom?
to 1999 or 2000, something like that.
Oh, wow.
I don't really know because I haven't seen the car, but that's what it looks like to me.
18 years old. It's amazing how long this stuff lasts. Say, like even the Fairlane, that wiring loom was like pretty much not mint condition, but there was nothing wrong with it for 40 years old.
On the other hand, some don't last at all, and rot away and set fire to things.
Have you ever seen a fire in a car before?
No, I don't think I have.
Never?
No, because I don't use solder, bro.
Have you ever had any fires in the workshop?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I remember that one time with the Volvo, there was a fire there. Is that we don't speak about that?
No. No.
Had a tape.
My third roll now.
So you've got like another 4 rolls to go before you get to the end over there?
No, this one will do it. So the loom's all done. We got it all buttoned up. It's all covered. Last thing I'll do is just glue the grommets back together. So just use a bit of super glue for that. In there.
Is there any special super glue, bro? Or just standard coal stuff?
I don't know. Just sicker super glue.
And that's the grommet that goes on the driver's side, is it?
No, it's passenger side firewall. That's driver's side. That one is untouched.
And what happens after this? What's going on? Anything else to do?
Chuck it in a box and give it back.
Good to go.
Oh, and you got to sweep up the mess.
It's quite a mess there, bro. It's a good job for you.
No, you're the apprentice.
No, I've got stuff to do, man. Sorry.
So the loom's all done. I've continuity tested it to make sure everything's done correctly. Wrapped it all back up again. I've mostly used the GD wrap, which is this newer type, rather than conjute or just tape. So it's ready to go back to Benny. It's either his or one of his customers. This took me probably 10 hours, but I have done hundreds of them. I don't even remember. Been doing it for over 10 years, so don't expect it to be a quick job if you want to have a go at it yourself. But if you follow the advice that I've given you, and you've got a bit of wiring nous, you can do it. This doesn't just apply to Subarus. A lot of other Japanese cars will do integrated looms. Mitsubishi does it. So if you want to swap engines over, sometimes this is needed to be done. So give you a bit of an idea of how much waste there is. That's the pile. That's the leftovers from it. So there's quite a lot of work in it, as you can see. Some people might just say, why don't you use an aftermarket computer? Yeah, that is an option. However, this will remain legal because it is using a newer ECU, and that is important in certain areas. You'll get an engine conversion through an engineering report, no problems at all, if you use a factory ECU. If you don't use a factory ECU and it's obvious, they will most likely want you to have an emissions test, which you would never pass. So that's kind of the reason why people go to all this trouble. It's also tunable, as we spoke about. So there's a lot of advantages to this, and that's why people do it. So that's all for now.